Ever since the first awakenings of human consciousness, we've wondered about communicating with the forces of creation. In the Bible, Jacob dreams of a ladder connecting heaven and earth. In early human societies, the responsibility of contacting the divine, the supernatural, belonged to the shaman, witch doctor, medicine man. The search for these individuals had brought me to Mexico, where by being a monitoring cactus, I had real chance of seeing for myself the hidden world of the gods. I'm here in the Sierra Madre of northwest Mexico in order to visit the Huichol people, whose shaman eat an hallucinogenic cactus in order to see this normally invisible dimension. And what makes these people particularly special is that once a year the shaman leads ordinary people on this journey. I'm hoping that this year I'm going to be able to join them as they come face to face with their gods. Every year, groups of Huichol pilgrims leave their homes in the Sierra for the arid desert of Huiracuta, a round trip of up to 1,000 miles. This forbidding wasteland is an Eden to the Huichols, a land of gods where their ancestors, the ancient ones, once lived. As long as the Huichols continue to honour the gods and make the pilgrimage, the sun will rise and the rain will fall. If they fail, their world and ours will cease to exist. The key to this relationship is an hallucinogenic cactus called Peyote. Only when it's been found and eaten in the desert will the pilgrims be able to communicate with the gods. Once, the earth was cold, dark and barren. The mother creator of all things, our grandmother Takutsi, told the ancient ones about the Peyote, which would teach them how to bring the rains that enabled the crops to grow and life to flourish. Peyote brings on the ecstatic state necessary to speak with the gods, but it also has its own power. It revealed to the ancient ones that they were part of an interdependent universe. The visions brought on by eating peyote transport pilgrims today back to a time and place where the ancestors could communicate with everything else in creation. The Peyote pilgrimage reenacts the original journey to Huiracuta, made by the ancient ones thousands of years ago. Until recently, the pilgrimage was made on foot or by mule, but that's been practically impossible since the 1960s, when a major highway was built through a key part of the route. Once, the Huichols owned all the land between the desert and the mountains, but they've been pushed into ever more remote areas by first the Aztecs, then 500 years ago by the Spanish, and most recently by the Mexicans, or mestizos. Today, the Huichols live in small communities spread across the mountains, connected to the outside world only by dirt roads and footpaths. The rugged terrain helped the Huichols preserve a way of life that's remained largely untouched since before the Spanish arrived, although the loggers and their trucks are eating their way up even these steep slopes. Though the Huichols are now settled here, they believe that once they lived as hunters in the desert. Peyote designs are often woven into the clothes they wear. Since there isn't enough food to sustain them all year, many Huichols are forced to leave home to work in tobacco plantations on the coast. Despite the onslaught of missionaries and evangelists, and the influence of Mexican schools and hospitals, most Huichols still prefer to maintain a distance between themselves and Mexican society. I'd been introduced to a remote village considered one of the most traditional of all Huichol communities. Life revolves around the growing and harvesting of maize, the basis of Huichol diet. Maize, vital to physical sustenance, is closely associated with peyote, the sacred cactus. The peyote hunt can only take place during the months between the maize harvest and the sowing of the next season's crop. Matsuo, an apprentice Murakami, or shaman of the Huichols, was in charge of the pilgrims this year as part of his initiation. This would be his 6th pilgrimage, but he reckoned he'd have to make the journey at least twice more before the gods taught him enough for him to be initiated as a full Murakami. Like many societies which still have medicine men, for the Huichols, nature is indivisible from the divine, and the landscape is full of sacred power. Wolves are important animals because they're supposed to have taught the Huichols how to hunt. Matsuo took me to a shrine dedicated to them.
Los cantadores dicen nomás que dice que el compañero del juego, los lobos. Entonces aquí lo tiene su peñasquito para que dejan ahí las ofrendas y sus flechas y su velita.
It's impossible to say just how many gods the Huichols have, because every bush, every stone, is imbued with sacred energy. Grandmother Takutsi gave everything a life force, a soul, and humans have a responsibility to respect her creation. That creation, and the Huichols' relationship to it, is often depicted in yarn paintings. The most important animal is the deer, our elder brother Kayumari, the intermediary spirit between humans and the gods. Only where Kayumari treads does the peyote grow. Given the responsibility of maintaining harmony between the gods and humans is the Murakami, who is chosen by the gods for this role.
Porque nosotros vamos yendo a visitarlo y dejar las ofrendas, entonces ya ellos ya nos dicen cómo qué es lo que va a pasar, y si fue bien o no fue bien, o faltó algo, y qué pasó, y cómo vamos a andarlo, y vamos a andar bien, o va a llover bien, o no, ahí es nada más, y por eso vamos ahí.
Led by Matsuo and 3 full Murakamis who'd had dreams telling them to begin, we set off across the Sierra. Those left behind in the village would keep fires burning during our absence, and in their bags the pilgrims carried the prayers of their families, in the form of offerings to be left at sacred sites en route. We travelled in single file and in strict order, representing the gods, or allocated specific roles, such as teacher, policeman or judge. In effect, we were recreating a mini-society for the duration of the pilgrimage. The most senior Murakami was Grandfather Fire, Tatewari, and he led the group. Behind him was Matsuo, Tatewari's assistant. With us were 3 people on their first pilgrimage. They'd spend much of the time blindfolded, since the beauty of sacred sites along the way had the power to blind them.
It's getting hotter and hotter as we descend into the lowlands, and really it feels like we've left a fortress, that Sierra that's kept the Spanish and more recently the mestizos at bay.
But there was evidence everywhere of how times had changed. A 100 years ago, this was thick forest which they owned, but now the Huichols have to negotiate the fences and cattle herds of Mexican ranchers. This set a pattern for the rest of the pilgrimage. Many of the sacred sites on the way are now on land owned by farmers who refuse access to them. Pancho, representing Tatewari, Grandfather Fire, was one of the most respected Murakamis in the region, and the success or failure of the pilgrimage rested on his and Matsuo's shoulders. That night we camped at the foot of the mountains. Ever since we'd started, the camps had been organised in a meticulous fashion. Trees and scrub were cut for firewood, and 2 fires aligned to the rising and setting sun. The larger of the 2 is Tatewari, a god held in great affection by the Huichols, because he was the first to allow his powers to be harnessed by humans. It was Tatewari who told humans where to find the place the sun was born, and how to ensure he rose again after each night. To this day, the Huichols greet the rising sun with candles and prayers in thanks for the blessing of light and heat that he brings. The first morning out of the mountains, and as always Tatuari was asked for blessings before we set off on the bus which was waiting for us. When the pilgrimage was made on foot, it took between 3 and 4 months to complete. Now, if they can afford it, pilgrims hire a truck or bus, which cuts the journey time to a month. Before they get near the desert and the sacred Peyote, the pilgrims must prepare themselves thoroughly. Wirrakuta is seen as a paradise where the divisions of human life, man, woman, old, young, life, death, do not exist. It's as much a state of mind as a physical location. In order to enter it, the pilgrims have to be pure. We'd kept our food intake to a minimum since we'd left the village, but everyone in the group also has to confess all the sexual sins they've committed since the last pilgrimage. It wasn't something I was looking forward to. For those Huichols on the pilgrimage for the first time, it's even harder. At a particular sacred site, now the border between the states of Jalisco and Zacatecas, the primeros must confess everyone they've ever had sex with. That a road runs straight through seems to matter little to them. Walking on ahead, the Marucames and elders separated themselves from the rest of us, who waited to see which primero was called first. After confessing and being symbolically beaten for every sin, the primero is led in a dance that represents the original journey of the ancient ones. The whoops and cries of the press gang represent the howling of wolves and are intended to lighten the serious business of confession. As the only woman on the pilgrimage, this primero must have been feeling the pressure. Entonces, los peyoteros tienen miedo porque es necesario confesar.
No, para nosotros ya no. Cuando es la primera vez sí hay un poquito de tensión.
Sí.
Pero ya segunda vez ya no.
¿Qué es mucho tiempo? ¿Hay muchas confesiones o...?
No, no te, la temperatura del Wirrárica es muy,
Sí.
muy alto. En mujeres pues es más.
Sí.
Sí, pues.
¿Por qué?
Pues la temperatura, digo, el calor sube demasiado y...
Okay, lining up again.
Pero no te vas a escapar tú también.
Sí.
They're coming for you now.
Oh no.
I hoped I got away with not confessing, but unfortunately, Matsuo said everyone else, including me, would have to confess that night. For the pilgrims, it's a crucial stage in the process of preparing to meet their ancestors and gods. It's vital there are no secrets between the pilgrims, and that everyone is brought together through a shared experience before they taste the peyote. If anyone lies or shows animosity towards anyone else, the peyote will find them out and subject them to torment in their visions.
Entonces tamacha terus tangga ni kita ke aja.
The process of shedding the trappings of everyday life had been underway ever since we'd set off. Every spare moment we'd had, one of the elders made us memorize new names for everything around us, so that we could leave the old world behind as we approached Wirrakuta.
Senora que te tierra. Santa Catarina que te tierra. Senora que te tierra. Itu que te tierra. Piriguari que te tierra.
Everything around us is being renamed. The earth is now going to be called the sea. The ficus trees, they're going to be called the whales that swim in the sea. Pigs are now going to be called hippopotamuses. And so it goes on. It's a way of detaching us from the world that we've known, so that we're free to enter a different world, the domain of the gods.
Every year this is done differently, and the pilgrims are required to remember hundreds of names perfectly.
No, que hacemos
más o menos yo como que me naca no te recuerdo pero si para y alguien nada más que
As evening approached, the camp was made ready and everyone fanned out to cut firewood. The preparations were as efficient as ever, each pilgrim carrying out the task he'd been allocated since the start. There was a Minister of Culture, whose job it was to make sure all the rubbish was collected, a man who made sure the wood was exactly the right length, even someone to take the bags from the marakamis. The only thing missing was someone to cook. We were still on minimal rations, a few tortillas and oranges, when we had time to eat. Along with the renaming of the world and the confessing of our sins, this was another way the pilgrims separated themselves from their mortal state. The fire god Tatawari is one of the most important Huichol gods, and is considered, like all the gods, to be a great Marakami. Tatawari knows whether the pilgrims are telling the truth when they confess, and we'd have to confess to him before telling the Marakamis about our sexual sins. The affection with which the Huichols regard Tatawari reflects their past as desert-living hunters. In the scorched wastes, it was the fire that warmed the cold nights, cooked the food, and provided safety from desert animals.
These fires are cherished in a way I've never ever seen around the world. They're lit by a flint which was brought from the place where fire was said to have been born. Sticks are laid on carefully, always facing west to east, and around the fire are placed white sticks, and these are guardians for the main log of the fire.
Ana inuti na pagkatari ana idine nang kusani te kari kata to kari kata pang kusani tam ke LT am ke mo to wata uyen ag as kenda ag yesa de powara animal todo el mundo le mo yesa ag powata uyen.
Late that night, the build-up to the confessions began. The offerings brought from the village were laid out. Then Pancho, the head Marakami, began to pray to the gods, calling on them to witness what we were doing in their honor.
This prayer's been going on for 3 hours now. Just like all the other shamans I've met, the Marakami have this extraordinary ability to summon energy from somewhere. But not only do they have to be equipped with these powers of stamina, but they also have a duty to all those here to lead their souls safely through this experience and back home again. And not only that, but they have a duty to the gods that they call to do the right thing by them. And if they fail, then, well, people say they become sorcerers, and their powers are turned against them and against their own people. I've been trying to work out what I've got to confess, and naturally it isn't all that much. However, it turns out they're rather expecting me to name all my former girlfriends, all those scores of them. Anyway, I've been walking around wondering what to say in my confession, and I bumped into a lot of people standing around the fire, and they were just doing exactly the same, wondering whether they should mention someone or other's sister and someone else's mother. But for people living in a tight community, it's not easy.
As the most senior pilgrim, apart from the Marakamis, Matsuo was the first to confess. He started by confessing to Tatawari, then to the Marakamis, who are the gods' mortal representatives. It was early morning by the time my turn came round. It was an uncomfortable moment, but unavoidable if I was going to be a full member of the group.
Okay. Mi primera novia fue Patricia de México.
Ah, de México.
Qué bueno. Muy buena.
Mexicano.
Muy bonita.
Hey, muy bonito, pero pobre.
No, rica. Mucho dinero. Y después otra inglesa, se llama Joe. Y después otra se llama Charlotte, con un carro bonito. Y después hay otra de la India, se llama Chita. Otra bonita también. Muy bonita.
Ni modo.
Modelo. Exactamente. Y después hay Luis. Y tal vez hay dos otros, pero no recuerdo sus nombres.
Está fácil.
Bueno. Para que te quiera el tacahuarí y el sole. Hasta que apa motivando porque
The next morning, I found I could remember a few more girlfriends' names, which had somehow escaped me when confronted by the Marakamis. I was worried I wouldn't be pure enough to eat the peyote safely. But the mood in the camp was very different. The confessions had helped bring us together, and I was suddenly taken fully into the group. We were almost ready to face the desert and the eating of the sacred peyote. Very soon I'd get my chance to see the realm of the gods. In early human societies, the responsibility of contacting the divine, the supernatural, belonged to one person, the shaman, witch doctor, or medicine man. My search for these individuals continued in northern Mexico, where I joined a pilgrimage into the desert in search of a mind-altering cactus. Eating it would give me a real chance of seeing the hidden world of the gods. I was with the Huichols of the western Sierra Madre. The pilgrimage is, to them, a journey to Eden, the land of their gods, and the place where the sacred peyote cactus grows. In order to enter the desert and eat the peyote safely, we'd begun to separate ourselves from everyday life by confessing publicly our sexual sins and changing the names of worldly objects. Matsua, an apprentice Marakami, the shaman of the Huichols, was in charge of the pilgrims. He'd been helping me understand what was happening, and, with his advice, I was hoping for my first experience of the spirit world of the Huichols. We'd been travelling first on foot and then by bus for 2 weeks. In the next few days we'd be in the desert proper, and our search for the peyote would begin. For now we were near the desert margins and busy with our final preparations. Along the way we'd left offerings at various sacred sites. Now, wood brought from their mountain homes was being made by the pilgrims into arrows, which would carry the prayers of the family members who hadn't been able to make the pilgrimage. The Huichol's gods demand respect, and making the arrows look beautiful is one way of showing it.
Entonces utega para ukira mute me yatuani ta ole te masurianta mota kia para te me tati.
Feathers, given to the pilgrims by their families, were attached to the arrows to make sure they flew high into the heavens. Each feather had itself been prayed over and blessed, and once the new arrows had been anointed with deer blood and sacred water, they'd be ready to be presented to the gods. The peyote pilgrimage used to take up to 4 months to complete on foot. With a bus or truck now the only option, because of the roads and fences that block their way, the Huichols can finish the journey inside a month. At last we were at the gateway to the sacred desert, so everyone and everything had to be blessed by the Marakamis and elders before entering. The gods demand purity, not only physical but spiritual. Fasting and a lack of sleep had helped us further separate ourselves from our mortal state, essential if we wanted to eat the peyote and meet with the gods.
Aquellos son los principiantes, deben ir tapados para, como es la primera vez, tienen ir así. Ya la segunda vez pues ya libre.
Libre. It's the first time we have seen this stretch of desert, because the first time his eyes were covered, like all the first timers. It said this is such a sacred place that you'd be overcome in the first visit here if you're able to see it.
The feathered wands of the Marakamis and elders act to sweep away mortal concerns and continue the transformation to a state of innocence. The peyote grounds were still some way off, and there was one more sacred site we had to visit before the hunt for the cactus could begin in earnest. Tatimatinieri is a spring now on the edge of a dusty Mexican village. To the Huichols, the spring is a goddess who in the distant past transformed herself into water so the Huichols might survive droughts. The local Mexicans regard the Huichols with a mixture of amazement and irritation. Despite a government sign demanding that no one other than the Huichols use the spring, and the barbed wire put up to protect it, the grazing animals and the litter strewn about pollute the sacred water. The significance attached to places like this lends credibility to the Huichols' belief that once they lived as hunters in the desert, dependent on such springs. Despite living hundreds of miles away in the mountains, an area full of springs and streams, they still remember Tatimatinieri and give thanks to her. Water from here is collected and taken home to be used in ceremonies throughout the year.
Y no respetan ni siquiera, por eso no llueven.
The local youths have been told to get off the fence and show a bit of respect. But you sense the problem isn't just with the young, it's with everyone around here. There's a lot of murmurings. No one would say anything to my camera, but they're not happy about the way this place is being treated by outsiders.
For the primeros, the first-timers, this site is so filled with spiritual power that they'd be blinded if they saw it without being fully prepared. Only after they'd been blessed and introduced to the goddess could they be anointed with the water, which to the Huichols has the power to heal and purify the souls of the pilgrims. Driving through this sacred area was a strange experience. Deserts have always had religious significance, perhaps because here, above all, there is silence and uncluttered space. But driving a 40-seater bus through here didn't seem to bother the pilgrims. Their minds were focused on the search for the peyote, which would allow them to contact the divine.
An exciting moment, this. The gathering before the first search for peyote. But they're talking about a hunt, and they're preparing bows and arrows, because peyote is intimately associated with Kayamari. And so we're searching for this deer, hunting him down. And it's said that wherever he has just trod, there you'll find peyote.
This once pristine wilderness has in recent years been taken over by ranchers who've erected miles of fencing and graze their cattle and horses through it. They also burn the cacti to make grazing easier. Others take the peyote to sell as a recreational drug in the United States. On each visit, the pilgrims find less and less peyote. It's a popular medicine in Mexico, applied in a poultice to relieve arthritis and muscular pain. But to return home without peyote would be disastrous, a sure sign of the god's displeasure, and a threat to the existence of the world.
¿Por qué hay?
Suave, pues. Es que aquí se encuentra muy poquito.
Ajá.
Hay veces que no.
Sí.
De tiro.
Sí.
Es que el otro vez, hace como 2 años, fuimos a aquel lado, entonces hallamos como 3 biznaguitas así. Entonces, pero aquel lado no hallamos esto. No, este no, está jodido ahorita, este no tiene.
Sí.
Our first day's hunting was unsuccessful. Despite hours of stalking through the scrub, there was no peyote to be found. We drove deeper into the desert, to another site where last year the pilgrims had found lots of peyote. But there was a real sense of concern. To return home without the sacred cactus, and its ability to allow communication with the gods, was unthinkable.
Prayers at daybreak on an important day, not just for the Huicholes, but also for me, because wherever I've been in the world, I've always had to hear about the spiritual dimension second hand. But here, today, through this plant, peyote, I should see it for myself, or some semblance of it. Not what they see, but something that I can at least measure for myself.
Marcelino, the violinist, told me what had happened to him the last time he was here.
Entonces yo escuché un ruido y así, y luego yo escuchando ya tocar y así, sí.
Search party fans out, and I do hope we have better luck this time. Here's one, I think.
The Huichols are extremely careful when gathering the peyote. They approach it slowly, calling it beautiful names, and leave the roots in place so the peyote will continue to grow. Everyone collects individually for their families back home. They have to gather a huge amount, as it has to last them until the next pilgrimage, at least a year away.
¿Cómo es? Bebe. See, but and you look at this plant and you think, how can it be beautiful? Because it looks so ugly. But of course it is beautiful because of its power, its potential, what it's given these people, which is an understanding of their world and a glimpse and insight into another one.
Cascabel.
Oh yeah. Doesn't look very edible, and of course it's not. The reason why they're hallucinogenic is that they are full of alkaloids. These alkaloids are, well, they're toxins to try and discourage grazers like us humans.
Todavía así empeyotado, Chihuahua, pues hay veces me asustan los pajaritos como que cantan y la rama que me se parece que estaba, el venado corrió así y con tanto miedo. Hasta alguno que no aguante, pues lo tiene que echar el balazo para tomar la rama.
One of the Marikamis had located an enormous peyote plant. He said it was here that Kayamari, the sacred deer, had come to earth, and here that the first peyote must be blessed and eaten. The decorated arrows were placed on this sacred spot to carry the prayers of the pilgrims' families directly to the gods.
Pues eso es todo. Si crees que tienes la conciencia tranquila, pues sí. No te es bien, es bien.
Sí.
Es bien.
One little peyote has been selected for me. I'm quite glad it's a small one. Los primeros comen más, ¿no? ¿Tiene miedo?
No.
Primeramente Dios. Dios.
Este.
Eso es.
Tengo ahí. ¿Este? Oh.
Este es el después este es primero.
Oh,
porque
super.
está bendecido este bien.
Ah.
Ok, bueno. Ajá, mi coño.
Ah, yes. Looks rather hairy, my one.
Yeah, hey, hay que quitar el pelo.
See, saca. Oh, good. So, you want to take off the hair, that's good. Right, it's my turn. Bit of orange. Ah. Bitter.
I got away lightly. The primeros had to eat a lot more than anyone else, around 60 segments, in order to ensure they had a direct experience of the gods. They were guarded by the Marakamis, who made sure they were well, but also that they ate every piece given to them.
Half an hour or so has gone by without any apparent effects, so I've been generously given some more.
I couldn't help feeling relieved at having to eat only a dozen pieces, but that was enough.
I've sat down on the desert floor to look at the world, which seems much as it ever did, but comes and goes a little. And there's a distance between me and everything around me at times, and then everything is in my face. People a little bit too near. The cactus limbs coming out at me. Coming and going. As if the desert has got a heartbeat and everything, even the stones, are chirruping, moving, vibrating, coming towards me, going away a little bit, and then a great deal.
I was glad I had the Huichols around me. Without them, the experience could have been much more traumatic, as many in the West who've taken it recreationally would testify.
I feel like a fish. No, that's going to sound wrong. I have a sensation of floating, and it must be like this if you're a fish floating in between the weeds. No, I don't think that's going to make sense.
The day had been a success. Beyond the feeling of mild euphoria, there was a tangible sense of relief that there was enough peyote here to take home. The gods were once again summoned to witness the work of the pilgrims, and as night descended, we slipped into our own dreams and let the gods talk. The effects of peyote are an individual experience for the Huichols, much like a dream. There's no collective group action, just an overwhelming feeling of calm and communion with everything around. But being Huichols, to whom laughter and music are as sacred as a prayer, it was natural to celebrate. And Marcelino began the refrain he'd learnt in Wirrakuta the previous year. As they danced, the pilgrims recreated the various stages of their journey to the revered land in which they were now fully immersed. What I felt was, above all things, a state of liberty. Not sure what I was anymore. I felt released. It must be a feeling that's all the greater for people like the Huicholes and other shamanic societies who are forever striving for harmony with the world around them, apologising to animals that they have to hunt, to plants that they have to cut. Suddenly, that didn't matter, you were released because you were in harmony at last. I wanted to know what other people's experiences have been. Most of all, I wanted to talk to David, one of the first-timers, who'd eaten a huge bowl of peyote.
Y se me abrió un panorama desde la primera vez porque yo no oculté nada. No oculté nada, fui sincero ante el fuego, ante Cayumari, ante Takagi, que es el sol. y jamás le oculté yo nada a él. Y entonces yo desde un principio me abrió un panorama y ahora ya me viene haciendo disfrutar, vengo disfrutando de todo conscientemente.
With the peyote gathered, there was one important task left. We had to climb Cerro Quemado, the highest mountain in the desert, to salute Callao, the sun, as he rose once more over the horizon.
No, pues ik de hotalega ana pa mujeka. Ik hotalega se ana penauye. Ik iwe ya se me jota na de bos no ik. Su kur shamote muger shamote wa ik ta se ana yana kana dan. Ana eta se mi ana eta senti wena ik e muger asmo ti sura. Mana se me kana ten mana se kre se poyo ta uye san. Huripa. Se ka agu. Se ka ri masa mana se okase que ta se li kere se hotalega petio na ka ka. Ta stawara ta pe ya ka. Pues que petit maite pues que ne tu kawariana y pues que ya nena como hermano de
In just a second, when the sun comes over the horizon, that really will be the start of the end of this journey, because this is where the sun is said to have been born, and we visited the last of the sacred sites. The sun will now retrace our steps, crossing over the land of Wirakuta, west to the Sierra where we started.
The pilgrimage was almost over, but my search for the world's medicine men wouldn't be complete without a visit to the very place from which the word shaman emerged. I was on my way to Siberia, where after decades of Soviet persecution, shamans were once again on the rise.